Kenneth Womack and Kenneth L. Campbell are the guests. They are the authors of the brand new book, Bruce Songs, the music of Bruce Springsteen, album by album, song by song. Welcome to the podcast, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Kenneth Womack, I've had you on before, so it's great to see you again. Kenneth Campbell, it's great to meet you. And quite a book covering every album and every song of Bruce Springsteen, quite an undertaking. First, how did you both team up to write the book? And can you talk about the process of putting this book together? There are a few excellent Beatles books that are important to mention here, right?
Well, we both teach at Monmouth University. We teach courses on Bruce Springsteen in different parts of the university. Ken teaches in the Department of History. I teach in the music department. And so there was a natural kind of affinity for the subject, but we're both longtime writers about the Beatles, and it was pretty clear to us that some of the steps that the world of Bruce Springsteen studies need mirror where the Beatles were, say, in the 1980s, to be fair. And some of those very important books that were published about the Beatles back in those days involved something like this Bruce Songs book. In fact, there's a wonderful book called Beatles Songs by a fellow named Dowdling. It's an excellent book, still is. And we are paying homage to him in this work. So that's how we got together, right, Ken?
Right. We have these mutual interests, and when Ken came to Monmouth some not too many years ago, 9 years, he's telling me, and I will never forget our first conversation. And we had lunch and we talked music and Beatles and other stuff, and we kind of, I don't know if you remember this, Ken, but we said then we've got to do a book together sometime, and we've collaborated on a number of projects. I've contributed a number of things to stuff that Ken has edited, and when Ken actually had the idea to do something modeled off of Dowdling's book, and we talked about it, and I was really excited about it, and just loved working on it. It really gave us a chance to build on what we've been doing in the classroom.
In the process of putting this together, because there's quite a bit of information here, you got reviews going back to the time, I think, when the albums came out, a lot that went into this. How long did it take, and what was that process like for you?
Well, it's taken a few years, as you might imagine. It helps that we're both immersed in the subject because, we're always preparing for the next time we teach Bruce. I'm teaching Bruce in the spring, so I'm always thinking about that. I know Ken has more than one foray that he carries out. We also had a student who received a grant through the university, Carly Migliarese. She works for the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music on campus, so she was able to use those incredible resources to help ferret out even a few more nuggets that we didn't have before. But a project like this, as much research as went into it, and there was quite a bit, is simply a sheer amount of writing because Bruce, right, Ken, has so many songs at this point.
It was really amazing, and I think that it would have been really difficult for one person to do what Ken and I have done.
Yeah, we wouldn't be done.
Right, and I think that the fact that readers of this book are going to get both of our expertise and both of our perspectives for every album. They're going to get an introductory essay by Ken Womack, a historical context essay by me, and then in terms of album and song analyses, we divided them up, but we divided them up in a way that I think people who read the book will probably not be able to tell who wrote which, which the songs.
I was wondering that. Yeah,
we were constantly talking and sharing our song analyses with one another, and I know I've been influenced by Ken a lot. So that was an interesting part of the process was sitting down and deciding who was going to do which songs and which albums, and I think it turned out good.
let's go back now. Let's go through the catalog here. Let's go back to the beginning. And before Bruce became a household name with the Born to Run album, there were two studio albums, Greetings from Asbury Park, New Jersey, and The Wildly Innocent, The E Street Shuffle, which were both released in 1973. And as noted in the book, heading into that first album, Bruce was being touted as the second incarnation of Bob Dylan, but he had also been in bands like Steel Mill and the Bruce Springsteen Band, both with a proclivity for electric guitar rock. So the question was, which Springsteen would win out, the folkster or the metalhead? And I feel like we get both on that first album. Actually, his lyrical phrasing is Dylan-esque, but the music is more Steel Mill. I don't know if you guys agree with that. What are your thoughts on the debut album?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about it. Bruce was here on the shore just last weekend, and he played. He actually, I thought about our book, Ken, because the first thing he said when he stepped on stage on the beach there in Asbury was "Greetings, Asbury Park," and immediately, began playing, songs. I played "Lonesome Day," but then he played several songs from that first album, and in my mind, I guess ultimately Bruce, the guitar band guy, wins out because the standout cuts are certainly Blinded by the Light, and maybe even for me, even more so is you know, gosh, the bit about Greasy Lake, right? The song where he's what a wonderful dark bluesy rock song that is. Why am I blanking on the title? Ken, bail me out.
Spirit in the Night.
Thank you, Spirit in the Night. Wow. Just with the incredible sax work by Clarence, etc. To me, that kind of noses him into the lead with Bruce the rocker. But Ken may see things differently. In fact, as part of our collaboration, Ken is more of the Dylan guy by a mile than this Ken.
That's true, and I have always been. I love music, but I would admit to being more of a lyric person than a music person. And I know Ken, who also teaches literature and English courses. I would never say that he's not a lyric person, but I think that he pays maybe a little bit more attention to the music than I do. But it's a balance, and I think that we both regard them as important. But yeah, no, to me, I don't disagree with it being a kind of hybrid of the singer-songwriter and the rocker, and I think that applies to Bruce's career as a whole. But I do think that what stands out to me on the album are the lyrics of a song like "For You." That is what kind of blew me away, and still does, about the album. And it does rock, and the two songs that he went back and wrote so that they would have potential hit singles, "Blinded by the Light" and "Spirit in the Night," are both great songs. But for me, it's some of the other songs like "For You" that really make it a deep and worthwhile album.
Or growing up, right?
Growing up,
Oh,
yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
that was again another one he played this weekend. It was just a real feast.
Yeah, first time I ever heard that song was from the live 75 to 85. I went backwards. That was, Born in the USA I had first, and then my brother-in-law had the box set, the vinyl box set of the live 75 to 85. And so I was hearing these songs live first and then went backwards. So it was interesting to hear those first two albums because it's different than what he ends up doing, obviously, as the years go on and we get to Born to Run. But some great insight into the songs, which I love. "Blinded by the Light." For the song's guitar introduction, Springsteen drew on the rhythm part from the Doobie Brothers' "Listen to the Music." I had no idea. I love that stuff. I love the minutia. Yeah. So on the
second album, even though it wasn't promoted, as we know, by the record company necessarily, that thing was such a leap forward for me. I know Ken feels the same way. It's such a joy to teach "The Wild, the Innocent, the E Street Shuffle." What a rich album.
Oh, it's incredibly rich. Incident on 57th Street and New York City Serenade and I mean, Rosalita, obviously, there that yeah, another really, really fun album, I think. I think that's where maybe even more than in Greetings, you see that real rocker side of him. Um, Kitty's back. There's so many different musical influences and genres that go into a song like that. Very, very underrated album, I think.
Well, Bruce was happy with this album much more than the first one. You note that in the book. He was much more satisfied with it in terms of the recording and the playing and the arranging of the band, which had yet to include Max Weinberg on drums. Do you agree with Bruce? Is it a better album than the debut?
For my ears, it is. For my ears, it may just be. I mean, it's the one I go back to as much as anything. I love that record. It is. It sounds as fresh today to me as it does when I first heard it, and the playing is impeccable. I mean, he's going, he's moving light years ahead of that first record, which was really kind of proving that he could make a record. It's just one of those great rock stories that even after The Wild, the Innocent, right, they still have to prove themselves.
Right. And even though they come out in fairly close proximity to one another compared to the gaps between some of his later albums, I agree that there's probably a bigger difference between those two albums than obviously they're very stark contrasts along the way between when you throw in Nebraska and the Ghost of Tom Joad and some of the things that came before and after them. But yeah, I think that there's a gap. I think he's obviously learned some things from doing the first album. I think he's more comfortable being himself on that second album. The first album, you could maybe tell a little bit that he's still trying to define himself and not sure exactly where he wants to fit. There's maybe not as much of a cohesiveness or unity to it, but with the Wild and the Innocent, he's paving the way, I think, for Born to Run, where he can take certain stories and concepts and blend them together into a coherent whole, which I don't think you could say of Greetings. If I would love to know if you agree, but that's kind of what I think.
Great piece of trivia, by the way, and on this one too. Springsteen drew the album's title from the 1959 Audie Murphy vehicle, The Wild and the Innocent, the Western film set in Wyoming, where mountain trapper Yancey, played by Murphy, goes to the nearest town to trade his pelts, but gets into trouble when he tries to save runaway dancehall girl Rosalie, played by Sandra Dee, from her shameful job. This is the kind of stuff you get in this book, folks.
People get in trouble when they start trading pelts.
Never trade pelts.
Never.
All right, now we get to an album called Born to Run. Born to Run I'm familiar with. I think I've heard of this album before. Born to Run, released in 1975. So this is where Bruce becomes a huge star. It's also the first formal release associated with the E Street Band. The name coming from a street in Belmar, New Jersey, where the mother of keyboardist David Sanchez lived. His mother, Stelma, let the band rehearse there. What made the difference with this album? What is it about this collection of songs that connected with so many music fans?
Well, it's Bruce's last chance saloon, for one thing, right? I mean, he has to win the right to make it by making such a great song in Born to Run. But it is without question, it's a bit of a miracle that we have it, given the politics of the recording industry and the challenges of trying to, in Bruce's case back then, maintain your deal, right? But it's everything that Ken was describing before, right? The storytelling has been growing by leaps and bounds, certainly between those first two albums, and by the third one, we're getting masterpieces like Jungle Land, right, or Thunder Road, with incredible story about taking chances. Have a little faith. There's magic in the night. The storytelling is so dramatic. It blows me away. The bridge in Born to Run is as good as anything in rock by itself. About the girls looking in the rearview mirrors while the boys comb their hair, and all that energy that just explodes by the end of that bridge.
He worked so hard on that album, and he worked so hard on crafting each and every song and the way in which he put it together as kind of a rock opera. You don't want to listen to a cut off of that album. You want to put that album on, and from the moment you hear those piano keys introducing Thunder Road, until the sax solo on Jungle Land. I know that he was unhappy at first and wanted to throw it in the swimming pool or whatever. But it is such a masterpiece. And I told people during the pandemic, I said, if you get too down, put Born to Run, put the album on and listen to the album, and it will take you into a place that will lift your spirits and bring you back to life.
And the titles, a lot of those titles, film noir,
Yeah.
like titles, he was a fan of that
Back
kind of thing.
streets.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, man. And his legal battle then follows, and that's with his estranged manager, Mike Appel. So that delays things. It will be 3 years later that Darkness on the Edge of Town comes out, released in June of 78. You write, in his autobiography, Springsteen wrote about what he attempted to achieve with this album, saying, quote, I was searching for a tone somewhere between Born to Run and 70s cynicism. I wanted my characters to feel weathered, older, but not beaten. He could have been perfectly describing himself at this stage of his career. Do you think he was describing himself with these songs?
I don't know that if he was necessarily. I think this is where Ken and I begin to get a lot of utility out of these albums in our classes. I mean, they all work. Don't get me wrong, but when you start thinking about 1970s history, post Watergate, stagflation's on its way, et cetera, the farm crisis, all of these issues that are going to emerge, particularly over the next couple of albums. It's just there's a rich mother lode of songs to be able to discuss, right, in class. You can talk about the history, which is Ken's forte, but also then go right back to the personal, where Bruce is in his life at that time too. And it's a marvelous experience.
He's writing about the working class. He's writing about American society and life at that time. He's writing about some of his own disillusionment. He's writing about the lies that leave you nothing but down and brokenhearted. The lies that he felt he had been told as he entered the music business and discovered what a kind of brutal, harsh world it could be. And to me, there are a lot of personal elements that make their way into the album, but I think that it is one of the genius characteristics of Bruce that he is able to make the personal more relatable to life in general, and use his own experience to tap into larger human concerns and particular historical concerns, where I do think that, as we said, that he's reflecting both where America is and in some ways where he is at exactly the same time.
Maybe the most interesting track for me is Candy's Room. The overall sound of it, and the hi-hat, and the lyrics, pictures of heroes on the wall. And yeah, that album is packed from start to finish with classics. And Badlands, by the way, the central riff taken from the Animals' 1965 hit, Don't Let Me Be Misunderstood, which had originally been popularized by American singer-songwriter Nina Simone. I love that. The roots of the 1980s double album, The River, were several tracks recorded during those sessions for Darkness on the Edge of Town. Among the reviews included in the book is one from Sam Sutherland of High Fidelity, dated January of 1981. He writes, quote, "On the River, he has done nothing less than summarize and extend the best features of his past work, fitting them into a brilliant conceptual framework. What makes that sense of formal purpose work is the seeming informality of the music itself, alongside the deliberation of darkness on the edge of town, or the all or nothing fervor of Born to Run. These new songs often sound playful, off the cuff, or even relaxed. Yet underneath the restored exuberance of its uptempo rockers and the spare low-keyed ache of its most introspective ballads lies a steady heartbeat." Double albums can be risky. It's hard to come up with something that's all killer and no filler. Is The River perfect as is?
Well, this is Ken and I are used to this debate from our work in the Beatles about a certain double album, but you know, it depends on where you come down. Are the songs, universally great in the same way that I experienced Born to Run or The Wild, the Innocent Easter Shuffle? Not for my money. But what I do like about it, and what I like about teaching Springsteen, especially by this point in the semester, is we talk about, in my courses, we talk about ambition. This is an ambitious guy. It would be very easy and even welcome, right, in a certain sense, by record companies and executives, for him to just do the same old thing over and over again. They'd be fine with that. But what Bruce shows us is that he's not that guy, that he's playing for something much larger. And of course, to show up then with Nebraska is proof positive.
Yes.
It's an ambitious record, and so I excuse it and love it for that reason.
Yeah, I would admit to not loving every song on the river, and
actually, I don't think Bruce does. From what we've discovered,
Bruce is not happy with all the songs either.
I think, aren't there a couple that there's one he said he considers to be his worst song?
Crush on You, I think.
Yes, no. Crush on You.
Crush on You, I think but just like with the White Album, which is what Ken was referring to, of course. You could have taken some songs off of there and still had a great album, and arguably a better album. But
now we're fighting. Because this guy,
ding
everything
ding
stayed. Wild Honey Pie, it's a masterwork.
I would leave. I actually don't disagree. I would leave it alone too, because the Beatles were they decided that they could share, that they were entitled to share whatever it was that they were doing, and because they were the Beatles, it was going to be interest, and even the songs that people might not like as much provide such a wonderful contrast with others that they kind of enhance the quality of what else is on there. I think a similar principle maybe works with The River, but I think that whatever you think of the album, and I agree with Ken that you're not going to listen to every single song and be as engrossed by it as you would by those on some of his other albums. When you listen to, when you do listen to it, what you're hearing is somebody who's decided that he doesn't need to be one thing or the other. That he can be the soulful, thoughtful singer-songwriter who writes Independence Day, and at the same time he can write include Out in the Street or I'm a Rocker. But you Point Blank, The River, there are some real classics on that album. And I think probably the biggest thing that stood out to me from doing the book, it was how even when you think that he has like a throwaway song on there, he's still writing from a perspective that is in harmony with things that he's writing on his more serious or his more epic songs. And that increased my appreciation for some of the songs that I thought maybe were like good party songs, but maybe there's not that much to them. But you listen to a song like Out in the Street, and there's a lot going on there.
Stolen Car is another one. Drive All Night is another one. Two great songs that, I don't know if you recall, was the Sylvester Stallone movie in the 90s, Copland. I think they used both of those songs for that film. Yeah. Hungry Heart was written for the Ramones. Bruce runs into Joey Ramone at Asbury Park, but John Landau was the one who said, no, we got to keep this one.
Yeah.
That was the right call. Yeah. What comes next? Yeah, it's one of the boldest moves in not just Bruce history, music history. I think Bruce is now at the point where the record label's banking on another hit record, right? And they didn't know he was going to deliver a stripped down dark batch of demos recorded on a 4-track recorder, which would end up being 1982's Nebraska. As with all of the albums in the book, you include many of the reviews from critics. What was the overall response to the album by them? And what are your opinions of this album?
Well, the response was typically very strong. I mean, it was risky, but it was done so well that people cottoned to what Bruce was trying to pull off. Um, it's such an interesting portrait to provide in 1982, right? These different caricatures that Bruce provides about outlaws, people living outside the boundaries of society, etc. I mean, the thing really still rings strongly with me today, Ken. I mean, it sure connects with history a lot, doesn't it?
It sure does, and I just wrote an article on teaching Springsteen's Nebraska for a special edition of a journal that Ken's editing, and uh, there are so many rich themes that he develops in this album, and a general attitude towards American history that is reflective of the time, but it's also reflective of, deeper long-range concerns about the direction that the country is going in. The album, I think, got pretty good or favorable critical reviews. It certainly didn't maybe resonate as much with certainly his casual fans, but I think it's held up pretty well. And as a cultural and historical artifact, I think it's one of his most important works.
Yeah, the house that he recorded those songs in is still there. And the carpeting, everything that was there when he wrote the songs, it's all still there. Yeah. And then we would later find out that if Bruce doesn't follow his heart with Nebraska, Born in the USA would never have happened. He had to purge those feelings to record another straight ahead rock and roll album. And he comes up with one of the biggest selling albums ever with 1984's Born in the USA. And he found inspiration for the album from reading Ron Kovic's Vietnam era memoir, Born on the 4th of July from 1976, as well as a script by Paul Schrader with the working title of Born in the USA. The title track, Cover Me, I'm on Fire, Glory Days, Dancing in the Dark, My Hometown, all huge hit singles, topped the charts in 9 countries, over 30 million copies sold worldwide. What were your first impressions of the album the first time you heard it? And how do you feel about it now, 40 years later?
Well, I'll be brief, but there are songs that I continue to love. I like I'm on Fire, for example, very, very much, or I'm Going Down. I love Teaching, the title track. Of all of Bruce records, though, the challenge for me has been, was then when it came out and is now, it just sounds like it's so deeply embedded in the 1980s, the sound of the 1980s, that I have trouble divorcing it from that. I can enjoy the melodies and certainly the work that he's doing with the record, but it just, of all the records, it feels dated to me. And
Which is why I asked that question.
Yeah,
40 years later.
For me, I know plenty of people who it is as central to them as, Exile on Main Street or whatever. But it it comes off, it's especially after Nebraska, which is so heartfelt and scathing. Then you have this album that feels highly polished and well produced, which it is, right? Those things are true. But I kind of miss the rawness a little bit.
I remember talking to somebody new at the time who was a Springsteen fan, and I remember asking her, "What do you think of Glory Days?" And I think I asked that because I hadn't made up my own mind about that song or the album. I didn't dislike it, but it wasn't, and nor did I expect it, to be, but it wasn't Born to Run. It wasn't Darkness. It didn't have even songs on it that to me stood out in the way that The River or Point Blank stood out for me on the River. So it's popular. I still listen to it and to songs from it, and I enjoy them. But it's more you kind of sing along to Cover Me or No Surrender. But they don't necessarily touch you in the way that Thunder Road or Jungle Land or Point Blank or 4th of July Asbury Park, or that's kind of maybe like missing a little something for me in that respect. But I didn't dislike the songs on the album, and I still don't.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, Dancing in the Dark is probably the one that's most 80s sounding, but it's the biggest hit on the album. Last song recorded for the album, and there's a story in the book I love. It was written at the urging of Landau, who felt that the album needed a lead-off single. Look, Bruce reportedly barked at Landau, I've written 70 songs. You want another one? You write it. And then that night, Springsteen retires to his hotel room. He writes Dancing in the Dark in one sitting and recorded in 6 takes on February 14th, 1984 at the Hit Factory. Now, I go with Tunnel of Love as my personal favorite Bruce album. Released in 1987. Comes at a difficult time in Bruce's life. His marriage to Julianne Phillips is in jeopardy, and he's reaching middle age. He's questioning himself and questioning himself in relationships. And he's more famous than ever before, which he's having difficulty with as well. He's got members of the E Street Band on the album, but it's labeled as just Bruce Springsteen on the album, which is interesting. But they did rejoin him for the tour. But an interesting comment I want to ask you about from Max Weinberg. This is in the book. He said, quote, things had been changing for a while in terms of the band. We had done the Tunnel of Love project, which was Bruce's solo album, and then we went on tour to accompany him. Although it was great fun, it felt at the time like something was winding down. So I made plans to go back to Seton Hall University. So I wonder if you guys felt that way at the time. And did Bruce's fans embrace the direction Bruce went with this album?
I would defer that part of the question to Ken. Like you, this is one of my favorites.
Okay.
And I adore the way it goes through all of these machinations about love and losing love and the stresses of, falling in love the second time around, right? And the brilliant disguises that we create, and then it ends up on Valentine's Day, which is a love song about family as much as anything else. I love the journey on this record, and I enjoy taking it. I mean, Ken, did he lose fans over this?
I don't know if he lost fans. I don't know if he lost fans over it, but I don't know that he gained a lot of fans as a result of it. I think if you were with him already, you might have. You might have just liked it because it was because it was Bruce Springsteen, but I don't know that it had the kind of, it certainly didn't have the kind of impact that Born in the USA had in terms of putting him on the popular radar. But certainly certainly the songs on it got some radio play. And I think Brilliant Disguise and One Step Back, that those are among his best song. I mean, I would put them in any list of his greatest songs. So to me, he's still doing really, really great and interesting stuff. And I like it better than Born in the USA.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I think people at the time were expecting maybe another Born in the USA, at least the fair weather fans, but he wasn't going to do that. He never, he'll never do that.
So you said something was changing, and I think something was changing at that point. Remember, Bruce is now in this business as a maker of albums for 14 years. He's been playing music a lot longer than that. Um, it it must have felt like, for most people, that's a career. And I imagine if you're in the E Street Band, after crisscrossing the world several times, promoting all of these records, um, it probably did feel like something was changing. Maybe they were getting to the end of something, right? I mean, in the 60s with the Beatles, nobody imagined having a career doing this. After the 70s, it would seem more apropos, but it had to have felt like something was winding down. I think that makes perfect sense. And that band, if they'd never done anything again, uh, we probably understand, right? I mean, that's a long run.
Kenneth Womack and Kenneth L. Campbell, authors of the new book, Bruce Songs, The Music of Bruce Springsteen, album by album, song by song. So Tunnel of Love would mark the end of Bruce's run in the 80s. It would be 5 years before he returned with 2 albums released at the same time. And I remember this very well. I was in college at the time. 92's Human Touch and Lucky Town. And this was kind of bittersweet. No E Street Band. Roy Bitten's there. He's on keyboards, the professor. But other than that, it's a whole new lineup for each album. I'm a fan of many of the tracks from both albums, mostly Human Touch. But yeah, for me, I was kind of wanted the E Street Band behind them. It just didn't feel right. What did you think of those 2 albums?
This is where I want to defer to my colleague first.
Okay.
'Cause Ken
I
found his way into these better and differently than I ever have.
I like to say that if anybody else but Bruce Springsteen had released these albums, they would be regarded as among the best albums of the 1990s.
Wow.
But because they are by Bruce Springsteen and he had set such a high standard for himself that fans were disappointed in them. Because they, for a number of reasons, wasn't doing them with the E Street Band. He'd moved to LA. They kind of, didn't see him as like as maybe as relatable on a personal level as he'd once been. This was during a kind of recession. I think that was Dave Marsh who pointed out that it took a certain hubris to release 2 albums simultaneously with each separate prices on them, while people were struggling economically. But I think that there are really, really interesting tracks on both albums, and had a lot of fun analyzing them when we were doing the book.
So now we move into the mid 90s. He released the largely folk and acoustic oriented The Ghost of Tom Joad, November of 95. Earlier that year came the Greatest Hits album, which featured the return of the E Street Band on Blood Brothers and This Hard Land. His song Street of Philadelphia won an Academy Award, 4 Grammy Awards, including Song of the Year and Best Rock Song. I feel like the whole decade of the 90s was like an extended Nebraska thing for Bruce. Like he had some things to sort out in his music and his life to get to that point where he brings back the E Street Band in the early 2000s. How do you look back at that decade for Bruce, the 90s?
I think that's a brilliant way to think about it. I typically teach Tom Joad along with Secret Garden and Streets of Philadelphia. I see them sort of as a piece, even though sonically 2 of those songs are not like a lot of the material, because they typify so many of the ways I think about the 90s and that decade. And it's interesting that in the case of Tom Joad, Bruce had to go to a Henry Fonda film essentially to be able to find his way not just into the Grapes of Wrath, but into the 1990s. It's just a fascinating lens, and there is a Nebraska-esque kind of quality, Ken.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And this is another album that really lends itself well to teaching from a historical perspective, because you can talk about the Depression, and you can talk about Woody Guthrie and Grapes of Wrath, and you can sort of trace Bruce's interest in American history and how that's shaping him, but it's still also set at a particular moment, and it is about the present as much as it is about the past. So it is really a great album for teaching Bruce and entry point into the decade. And you also have to remember just that, so what, and he's like 40, mid 40s, at this time. So his interests are becoming, he's certainly more mature. His interests are becoming more serious, and he's got some important things to say, and he uses this as a vehicle to say them, and I think it's great.
Streets of Philadelphia was a song where it was not autobiographical. I think I remember him talking about that was a little bit of a different approach for him because he's now writing a song for a film. And it was just him. He does all the instrumentation on that song from what I recall, correct?
Well, and it's he's always had a deep social conscience, and speaking about the AIDS crisis and the ravaging of the American soul, etc., was right coming from him,
And then we have The Rising in July 2002. And that marked Springsteen's first studio album in nearly 7 years. It brought back the members of the E Street Band, produced by Brendan O'Brien. This was a response to 9/11. He would return to the cover of Time magazine. And I remember it felt like the music world needed Bruce at this time. And there's that great story that from his book that you quote in your book about he's in New York and a fan comes up to him and says, "Bruce, we need you." And Bruce says, "Yeah, I kind of know what he meant." So that inspired him to come back. Are you on board with the overall consensus of that album that it was a triumphant return for Bruce?
For my money, it certainly is. And, kudos to him. He comes back with a strong new producer in that way. The trilogy at the end of the album makes the thing for me, although there are several great songs like Lonesome Day, etc. But that trilogy at the end is just such a powerful ode to what a lot of people were experiencing and feeling at that time. It certainly was a triumph to my ears.
Mine too, as well, very much so. I think that it's an album that does reflect and address the tragedy of 9/11 in a way that didn't seem to sensationalize it or to trivialize it.
It wasn't exploited. No.
No, I mean it took it seriously and showed some empathy and showed some understanding, and at the same time, and this applies to some of his later albums too, you could listen to it and enjoy it without necessarily having to dwell on the tragedy. Because as Ken said, there are just so many just great songs on it. So I think by every measure, it was a success and a triumphal return.
The last three tracks, The Rising, Paradise, My City of Ruins. My City of Ruins is when he played like a week or two after 9/11 on that TV special.
Oh, correct.
Yeah. Bruce was as busy as ever in the 2000s. Devil and Dust, 2005. We Shall Overcome. The Seeger Sessions, 2006. Magic, 2007. Working on a Dream, 2009. I want to ask you about Magic, because there are songs on here that should have been huge hits. Radio Nowhere is one of my all-time favorite Bruce songs. Living in the Future, Girls in Their Summer Clothes. And I made note of this before reading the first line in the entry on Girls in Their Summer Clothes. You write, "This catchy pop tune could have easily been a hit if it had been released at an earlier time when such songs ruled the airwaves." Bruce expressed the same frustration. I remember reading an interview where he talked about that, and it's noted by the critic entries in the book that it's on the even record, but I think it's his most overlooked of the decade. Your thoughts on Magic?
That all of this is entirely true. He's had only one non-top 10 album since Born to Run, and that's Tom Joad, which is, you almost need to go back and look at the top 10 to try to understand why, because it's such a damn good record. But Magic is a number one album, right? And I think that we're now in a place in the industry where a person like a Bruce Springsteen is going to see his returns um, in terms of the album experience, right? Whereas, the singles artists of the day are often very different. This is just a fact of a very swiftly changing post-digital industry, right? Post file sharing, post streaming industry. Um, Bruce just competes differently. Ken and I were on a conversation the other day, and he'll remember exactly what I'm talking about. When this one fellow was really trashing the new album, right? Only the Strong Survive. And I think when we look at this entire period, first of all, we're very lucky, right? That we're all around. Life is fleeting, life is chancy and huge, to quote a philosopher from many years ago. And it's a wonder and a somewhat of a miracle that we're all experiencing what we are sharing together. Parking that idea for a moment, Bruce is the beneficiary of a long career, right? And having a long career means that you've spanned so many different periods, that you're literally spanning different moments in history where the industry has changed so dramatically. The fact that he's still topping or near topping the charts for albums is amazing. But this is what happens when someone lives a long life and has a long career. We get to benefit from the experience, but some, like this guy the other day, right, Ken, he just wasn't having it.
Yeah, no, he wasn't having it. And, when I just want to say one thing about Magic. When I heard Magic, and I like Bruce. I mean, I've been a Bruce Springsteen fan. I've listened to his music practically since the beginning of, and I listened to that album, and my reaction was, how does he keep doing it? I'm like, I like this as much as anything that he's ever done.
Amen to that.
That's the way that I felt. Gypsy Biker. I mean, every one song after another, and I'm like, this guy, he's incredible. That was my reaction to Magic. I'm glad you singled that out. I think there's good stuff on all of the other, albums too, and had really, Ken and I think both had a lot of fun writing about, songs that we maybe normally wouldn't pay as much attention to, but I think you were right to single out Magic among those 2000 decade albums.
Yeah, you'll be coming down. I don't know. Did I mention that one? There's another.
No, that's another one. Yeah, no, it's a fun rocking album, and I think like you might even compare it favorably to Born in the USA as like a really excellent pop album that I think I like better than Born in the USA.
Oh, I think I do too, and that is staggering to think that he can work at that level of quality for so long.
Yeah, amazing.
And I remember, I think it was around that time that Stephen Van Zandt was saying, he's like, Bruce just has like thousands of songs. Like, he just writes all the time. He goes, can you just give me some of those? Like,
Stephen Van,
where are you coming up with this stuff?
I forget which one it was, but on one of the documentaries, Stephen Van Zandt, it might have been on the one about Darkness, but Stephen Van Zandt said that if he'd wanted to be, he could have been like the best pop songwriter of all time, but he decided not to focus on that. But I think Magic is a good example of what Stephen was talking about when he said that.
Yeah. The following decade, we got Wrecking Ball 2012, High Hopes 2014, Western Stars 2019, Letter to You 2020, and then 2022's Only the Strong Survive. As sadly, Clarence Clemens passed away in 2011. He was, I believe, last heard on a few tracks from Wrecking Ball and High Hopes. I think he's on a few of those. And then his nephew Jake took over. And Clarence was such a huge part of Bruce's life. Did you think that maybe Bruce was going to decide to put the E Street Band to rest? And what did you think of the decision to bring in Jake?
Well, I realized the other night when he was playing Jungleland on the beach that the last time I'd heard it, Clarence played the sax solo, at least live. Clarence had played the sax solo, and Jake just killed it. He has really grown into that role. It was very tentative at first, not anymore. His voice as a musician is solid. And going to that question though, and I think Ken and I have enjoyed this part of the book as much as any. Um, the way Bruce has found himself in the wake of losing someone like Clarence, which is enormous, right? I mean, he marks time by when the big man joined the band, right? This is just an absolutely enormous milestone. And to have a record like Western Stars, Ken just talked
Oh,
about how does he keep doing it with Magic.
love that
Western
album.
Stars, not only did I think, how does he keep doing it? It's one of my favorite albums.
Love it.
I was surprised that I was getting that from Bruce at this point, right? A
Right.
record that I now go back to in the way that I do with that record. And I know Ken does too. We're both just, we fought over it on who was going to write up some of the entries, and it's just a masterwork,
Just
right?
cinematic and
It's very, very cinematic. It's obviously an homage to the 1970s in some senses, but it's also this arc of a story, again, from hitchhiking, right? All the way to this moment at the end, the hotel, right? Moonlight Motels. It's bills and kids and bills, where he takes it right down to the micro. Just so impressive. And a person who does that is someone who so many years ago had these ambitions, and then the skills to make the ambitions come true.
And just to amplify what Ken said, and I agree with him about Western Stars, but I feel about Letter to You the way that Ken feels about Western Stars. It is one of my favorite Bruce Springsteen albums, and the fact that he could again exceed whatever expectations I might have had of a new Bruce Springsteen album just amazed me. And I think that what happens is, I think what happened with, we asked about the E Street Band and being surprised that he brought them back. So you think about the Beatles, breaking up after the dozen or so years that they were together as a group, less if you want to just take the period that Ringo was with them, right? And it's not surprising. In fact, in one documentary, and this was not about the Beatles, but in one documentary, David Crosby said that it's never a surprise when a band breaks up. It's a surprise when a band stays together. All bands break up. It's just part of it's part of what happens, in the industry. People need to go and they find their own identity, or they need to, not just find new sources of inspiration, or you develop new friends as you go through life, and you might retain fond memories of your old friends, but a lot of them you don't see as much as you used to. That's part of all of our human experience. And I think that what Bruce has been very, very fortunate, we've been very, very fortunate that he reached a point where he realized that life wasn't going to go on forever, and that it was important to put old differences aside, and that he had always loved playing with these guys. And if he had a chance to keep doing it, he just decided he was going to keep doing it. And if you watch the documentary of the making of Letter to You, you can see how much like those guys really love each other, and it shows in the work and the quality that they put into it. And the last thing I would add in connection to that is you also see how much he cares about his audience, his fans, and it's why I think people who like him feel such a personal connection to him, is because he really seems to feel that with us, even if you've never met him, and I've never met him, and that doesn't bother me, because I still feel a connection to him, and I don't feel like I need to meet him to tell him that. I feel like he already knows that on some level. So
Yeah. Yeah. And there's great footage of him with the fans over the years. Like this one recently where he was on the street somewhere and fan was just like, "Can I just hug you?" And Bruce is like, "Come here." He gives her a big hug. That's he feels like a friend. So I guess that answers the question though. There was no question in your mind when Clarence passed, he's going to keep going with E Street Band. It was just a matter of who we're going to find to fill his spot. And they kept it in the family, which is great. I was just talking about Tom Morello with a coworker, and I brought up his work with Bruce, and he was like, "He worked with Bruce Springsteen?" I said, "Yeah, he did." What an unexpected move. And the results are interesting. He was on a few tracks for Wrecking Ball. He's on most of the songs on High Hopes, a collection of cover songs and outtakes, reimagined versions of tracks from past albums, EPs, and tours. I'm curious as to what you guys think of that, the results of that collaboration. Would you have been interested in hearing more of those guys together, writing music together, maybe?
And I'm going to let you take this.
Well, I was going to let you take that. I would just say that there are a lot of people Bruce goes back to again and again, which tells you about his confidence and the trust he has in them, to be able to work on them as fellow musicians. And you could pick some E Streeters, right? Like Stevie and others. The fact that he goes back to him, Tom brings him an edge that he likes working with. That's part of the beauty of all of, especially these 21st century albums, willing them into being when, there are other things that folks could be doing.
Western Stars we talked about. I put that atop my list of Bruce songs during that decade. And his last two studio albums are Letter to You from 2020, Only the Strong Survive, albums number 20 and 21. Interesting note on Letter to You in the book. It reads this: Letter to You holds the distinction of being the only album in which Springsteen and the E Street Band recorded every instrument and vocal live, with only a handful of superimpositions involving guitar solos and hand claps. So Kenneth Womack, you reviewed the album and noted that his most inspired choices are a trio of his earliest songs: If I Was the Priest, Janie Needs a Shooter, and Song for Orphans. What stands out to you about those songs?
It's interesting that he felt like he could go back to them, right? They may not have spoken to him in the same way earlier. And hearing them with the ears of an older person, he was able to make his return. I as a person who is a reader, like Ken is as well, it's like returning to an author and realizing you still, as an author, returning to earlier texts and realizing you still have something to say. I think that's where Bruce is. He needs to have a stake in it. It needs to be authentic for him to continue doing anything. I don't know that we've ever had anything from him that wasn't authentic, right? And those songs and the whole album really is just underscores how much commentary is left in his string.
I love those songs. I love that he included them on the album. I think that they are really, really nice compliments to his newer stuff and does give you a chance to listen to them with fresh ears. And I think Ken's right that they mean something different to him now, and they mean something different to us now, based on where we're listening. And I can tell you, so I guess I must be 6 years younger than Bruce Springsteen, and to find him now, and to some degrees, I felt like he's always been addressing things that have had some relevance to my stage of life when he's been writing about his stage of life, almost like an older brother passing down the wisdom that they've learned to help you navigate where you're going. And to find him writing One Minute You're Here and writing Ghosts and writing songs about aging and death. Again, that is such a service to his listeners, that would have, I think, been taboo in like rock, except to like maybe glorify, dying young or something like that, which some songs might have done. But he's made it clear he wants to stay here as long as he can, and he wants to appreciate every day that he has been gifted, and he wants to do what he does for as long as he can. And the fact that he's still touring and performing and still, involved in new creative projects is a model to all of us.
Yeah, he turned 75 on September 23rd. We're recording this about 5 days before his 75th birthday. So that answers one of the questions I have. Does Bruce still have things to say and express musically? So what do you hope he does next?
I hope he continues to do what he's always done, which is to follow his creative energies and see where they take him. Right? Which is a mystery to a certain extent, but it's, writing or being a musician who's a singer-songwriter like Bruce is always is endlessly fascinating to me. It's a journey that you're taking and for which you'll never really arrive at the end point, right? So it's always unfolding, and I can't wait to see what he does next.
21 studio albums that we had the pleasure of re-listening to and analyzing in some depth. And I wouldn't have wanted any one of them to be missing from his catalog. And I'm sure I'll feel the same way about whatever he does next, whatever it is.
Bruce Songs, the music of Bruce Springsteen, album by album, song by song, is out now. You can find it wherever books are sold. And where can people find you guys online if people want to reach out to you?
Well, I'm at my website, everythingfab4.com.
And Campbell at Monmouth, MONMOUTH.edu is my email address, and I'm happy to respond to anyone who wants to write to me.
Guys, thank you so much for talking about Bruce. I always love talking Bruce.
Thank you, Eric. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.